Alright, time for another draft science video presentation. Yeah, they keep coming. So, this will be more theoretical, qualitative rather than quantitative, more of a how you look at the evidence than just a bunch of evidence. Understanding what's going on, inside the balloon, let's say. So this is just about Newton's third law, this one. Professor Lewin does the other two laws, but he does them really briefly. He spends most of this lecture on the third law and, the equal and opposite reaction thing. And, yeah, I mean, people can say, oh, it's arrogant of you to attempt to say it better than Newton or Lewin. Regardless, I think it can be said better. It can be understood better what is happening. There's no opposite reaction force. There's just the idea, just as there's no such thing as inertia. There's no I don't want to move concept in physics. The comb, yes, I have one, even though it looks like it never gets used. It does have some use in it. Anyway, it was on the desk, so I picked it up. It's not resisting being moved. It's perfectly happy to be removed. It doesn't have any inertia. Okay, it doesn't have any resistance to change. It's just that somebody has to put the force into it. You have to pour the paint into the bucket before the bucket can say it has paint. But the bucket isn't saying, don't put paint in me. So I'm just saying conceptually it's sort of stated wrong, because there is no resistance to change. There's just the obligation to change something. You have to give it momentum before it has momentum. And understanding it as this give thing makes it understandable that there's no equal and opposite reaction. The fact is, if you give in this direction, you were at equilibrium. Okay, everything was stable. Your condition had a condition. I mean, even if it's not stable, even if you're moving this way and now you're going to add a force in another direction, there's no equal and opposite reaction. There's just the fact that if you give something in one direction, the fact is your condition was that you were at equilibrium. Every billionth of a second, you're adjusting to the circumstance, and so you're at equilibrium. Now, if you change your circumstance, you give something in a direction. The fact is that your condition is now changed because you gave away something. You gave away that way. Then your internal condition is going to have a deficit that way, and you still have the stuff going this way that was stopping it. The stopping force inside of you that kept you at equilibrium has now been broken, and now that force is going to be the equal and opposite reaction. There's no new force. There's just you create a deficit this way, which means all the checkers you still have going that way, if there were checkers, you threw some checkers that way. Well, it means the ones that are going this way now are more than the ones going that way because you gave away some. And it's that simple. It's not like there's some mechanism that's creating an opposite force. It's built into the fact of your equilibrium, and that you've disturbed your equilibrium by giving away something. And I think that's just a better way to understand it. So let's start from the beginning of his talking about it, and I'll be triggered, by the concepts and make the appropriate counter argument. Sync is a little bit off. Well, we'll live with it.
No longer works, then you have to use Einstein's theory of special relativity.
Oh, I have to make that louder. Alright, so we'll pause for a minute. I'll fix the camera too. Alright, should be back, and things should be right.
So is it?
Just can't win.
To study the mammal.
This is only valid as long as we have speeds that are substantially smaller, say, than the speed of light.
So just the qualification that Newton's laws have to be changed when Einstein's laws pop in, which is just nonsense anyway, because, frankly, they've never tested any of that stuff.
Now we come to Newton's third law. If one object exerts a force on another, The other exerts the same force in opposite direction.
Okay, the other exerts the force. So the other isn't exerting the force. So that's just the key concept. So yeah, Newton said it that way. I don't know, he wrote in Latin, so maybe it wouldn't be the same if somebody translated it correctly. But the idea is there's no opposite reaction force unless there's something that can oppositely react. I mean, there's no necessity for there to be even contact. So maybe the balloon example, this going out, what's the opposite reaction? I mean, the atmosphere isn't pushing back the other way. There's no other force, like the atmosphere isn't saying I'm going to push back on the balloon now. No, the opposite force is inside the balloon. The balloon had energy going this way, and this way, and this way, and this way, right? It was at equilibrium. It was staying where it was. So that means it had energy in all directions, essentially. It has checkers. Well, if it gives away stuff going this way, all right, that's all it just did. All it did was create a minus inside of here. It made this arrow much shorter because it's giving away that way. And now this arrow inside of it, okay, is the thing that's going to push the balloon this way. There's no opposite reaction. I shot stuff this way and now something pushed me this way. No, the thing that pushed you this way was the minus sign here. This minus is what's making you change your direction because what you have inside of you is already going to move you. So there's no opposite reaction from the atmosphere. And obviously this becomes obvious in space. The opposite reaction doesn't make much sense to say it that way, because the opposite reaction is the fact that the spaceship has a quantity of stuff. You shoot it in one direction, it means it already has the opposite direction. That was why it was maintaining its position. You're going to now change its, say if it was moving this way. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's moving and it does this. This is just saying that obviously I've changed the equilibrium. I've changed the condition. And so where I had a -2 in this direction before, well, this would be the -2, and this would be, I have 4 going this way or whatever. The fact is that wherever way your equilibrium's a good enough word. Adults should understand equilibrium. So I'm just saying you're at equilibrium with the environment. You change your equilibrium by expelling something. It's that expulsion that has now created the deficit inside of you. So the opposite force does not come from the place you hit. It comes from inside of you. Yeah, that's a simple way to say it. I mean, it gets complicated just because there's 2 ways you can interact. I mean, if we're on a road and you're spinning a wheel. Now, if I don't hit the road with the wheel's spinning. But is it giving away anything? I mean, it's only giving away to the atmosphere now, right? I mean, any movement, it's just giving away a tiny, tiny shred of movement to the atmosphere. So it's not giving away movement in any direction. But then when you touch it on the road, now it's giving away direction to the road. Okay, now it's giving away its rubber that way. It's throwing pieces of its stuff against the surface that way. And now it's got the deficit because it gave it away this way. It has to go this way because of its internal force, not because the road pushed back at it, okay, but because it gave away momentum to the road. It threw pieces of road this way by hitting it with its force, using its momentum, and now it has extra momentum this way because it gave away momentum that way. It gave away energy this way. So now it has to have more energy that way because it was at equilibrium. Okay. Yeah, that should be enough said. But we'll go a little further.
On the one. I read it again. If one object exerts a force on another, the other exerts the same force in opposite direction on the one.
So that doesn't happen. That's not what's happening. The object the road is just going that way. The road isn't pushing back at all. The road's just going this way. All right, so you're moving the road this way, and obviously it has enough internal forces going the opposite direction that you can't make the whole planet start spinning and all that stuff, but technically you sort of are. But it gets dampened by the entire movement of the Earth, and so you don't see any effect. It's such a tiny effect in such a giant object. So it just gets kind of absorbed as I didn't see that. Didn't mean it didn't happen. It actually did happen. You know, the Earth moved a little tiny bit because your tire's spinning this way, your car goes this way, the Earth actually went the other way, but it just went so little that you can't measure it. But it happened.
And I normally summarize that as follows, the third law, as action equals minus reaction.
Right, but the minus reaction isn't a real force. It's a force you already have that now has been strengthened because you gave away something. You give away, you have red and blue inside of you. You give away some red, now you're going purple, right? I mean, now you're going bluer rather than red. I mean, purple. So if you have an equal balance, you got purple, you give away some of your red, now you're going blue. You know, that kind of, it's just you're giving away something in one direction. And by doing that, your internal direction has to change because now you've changed the balance inside of you. I'm just saying this is really important because that's why they screw up all this energy equation, because they don't understand the force isn't some external thing. The forces can be the internal thing. Your internal condition is a force condition. You know, and what you're doing to the environment, what you're giving away is essentially how you're changing your condition. Let's say that another way. I don't need to say it another way. I think that's a good enough way to say it.
And the minus sign indicates then that it opposes. So you sit on your seats, and you're pulled down on your seats because of gravity, and the seats will push back on you with the same force. Action.
Now, right, but now we can understand that reaction as being a real reaction. You know, because you're actually physically pushing down on the Earth. The Earth has to change its balance, and now it's going to, you know, rebalance to the new pressure. You created more pressure in one direction. The Earth has to compensate for that more pressure, and it can't do it by moving, so it pushes back. You dent it, okay? The Earth is a dentable surface, and it just rebounds. So the Earth is like rubber instead of steel. If it was steel, let's say if the Earth couldn't absorb your dent, then the Earth would actually physically have to move in space, which would be the same thing from your perspective. But it won't do that just because of its huge mass. You're not going to see that happen. Because somebody else is going to sit on a chair in China, is the bottom line. For everything we're doing, the people in China are doing the same thing back the other direction. So it all gets negated. If we piled all the people on one side of the Earth and we had them all sit down, well, then maybe you could move the Earth.
Action equals minus reaction. I held the baseball in my hand. The baseball pushes on my hand with a certain force. I push on the baseball with the same force. I push against the wall with a certain force. The wall pushes back in the opposite direction.
All right, so it doesn't really. What's pushing back is your own internal. You gave away something, and now you're going to get, you know, your condition changed. But let's see. So the contact ones are more complicated, in the sense that you're giving the road direction, you know. But you know, in the same sense, you're giving yourself direction by giving away momentum in a direction. Let's see. I don't know how else to explain that. But to say that all the reactions are a reaction is wrong, and the spaceship is, I guess, to be the best analogy to understand why it's wrong. There's no reaction. Space doesn't react. You throw some thrust out. Space isn't reacting and pushing you the other way. What's causing you to move the other way is the fact that you gave away direction, not the fact that you're going to wait for something to come back and hit you.
Action is exactly the same force. The third law always holds. Whether the objects are moving or accelerated makes no difference. All moments in time, force, we call it actually the contact force between two objects. One on the other is always the same as the other on one, but in the opposite direction. I'm
just saying that's just, in my opinion, literally wrong. It's the wrong way to explain the law. The law is right. There's going to be a consequence that's going to appear like some external force is hitting you. But the simple explanation is your internal condition changes when you give away momentum in any direction.
Let us work out a very simple example. We have an object which has a mass m1. This is object number 1. And m1 is 5 kilograms.
All right, this
Here, attached to it, is object 2.
is not
and
very
M2
good.
equals 15 kilograms.
All right, let's try to go ahead. This example is just kind of okay. So we'll jump ahead a little.
It's an acceleration of 1. That's a given already. So here comes F equals ma. F12 equals n2 times a.
All right, so now he's using the second law to explain a third law condition. So his argument's going to be the small block hits, it can't give the same velocity to the big block, so it gives it a much lesser velocity, a much lesser amount of velocity. And he's sort of implying that the big block is what slowed down the small block, rather than stating the small block gave away, okay, its momentum. Its momentum leaked into the big block, and that's all you needed to have happen. You don't need any opposite reaction to slow down the small block. The small block wasn't slowed down because the big block pushed against it. The small block slowed down because it gave energy to the big block. It's moved it. It gave it its momentum. So this is the conceptual thing I'm trying to get to, is that momentum is movement inside of things. That's why heat is momentum. It's just that it's momentum in all kinds of directions, and therefore it has no direction. It has no bias in a direction. Without a bias in a direction, we can't see it very well. If it doesn't cause something to move, change its location, we're saying, hey, it doesn't have any energy. But of course it can have the potential to move because it can be under pressure, and all you have to do is open the valve, and now all the pressure shoots out in one direction. Well, now it's losing stuff in just one direction. You have to see the heat as kind of an explosion inside of something, and the explosion's trying to get out, and you're only letting one piece of the explosion out, one vector. You let one vector out, well, the other vector is still in there, and that other vector is the thing that's going to push it in the other direction. So the one block is slowed down because basically it has a bias when it's moving. When it's moving, it has a bias. It has more things hitting this side of the wall than this side of the wall. So it has a bias in a direction. When it hits the other block, it gives its bias away. Its bias leaks into the other block. That means it's losing its bias. So where it was 10 to 1, it's becoming 4 to 6, and then 5 to 5. In terms of the number going this way versus the number going that way. And that's all you're doing. You're just trying to equalize the pressure, pushing it in any one direction. And it gave its pressure. The number 2 block changed, and now you gave it a bias. But you can't give it as big a bias because it's a much more massive object. So if it has 20 checkers going this way and 20 going this way, and you're only adding 2, you're not going to create a very big differential. Right? It's only a 1/10 of a change in its motion. So you're going to give it a much slower speed. Where 2 checkers to the small object that only had 4 checkers altogether, you gave away half of its momentum. Half of its bias was given away, but the big object only gained 20% of the bias. So anyway, but again, so he's really physically arguing that somehow the number 2 block physically pushed against the 1 block, when it didn't happen. All happened is that the energy in the 1, the bias in the 1, leaked into 2. That's it. It poured paint into the 2 bucket. The 2 bucket never poured anything back at it didn't pour some other stuff into the other object. Nothing ever went that way. Something that had extra stuff this way gave away this way, which means it doesn't have a bias anymore.
We know A is 1. We know M2 is 15.
Jump ahead a
So
little.
we see that the magnitude of the force 1, 2 is 15 newtons.
Right, so he started with 20 and now it's down to 15, and and the other object is going to have the 5 left over to make back the 20, blah 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 blah. So you give a 5 velocity to the 2 object, the 1 object goes to 15, that kind of thing. Alright, so let's jump ahead just a little bit, see if we get something more useful. Oh, another commercial. Shit. And they don't even load. I mean, this is just, look, yeah, just waste my time with a commercial not loading. fantastic. That was just great.
This
Really
one
appreciate it.
was F to 1.
I mean, it's just kind of pathetic that he can't just ask for donations or something. You know, I mean, he could get plenty. Oh, I'm a professor. I should have more money. So, yeah, I need an extra 10 grand a year. So, yes, just send me 10 grand worth of donations, right? He could get plenty of money, right? You know, instead of annoying his entire audience. I mean, what the hell?
Times A. This is 1, this is 5, this is 20, and so this one, you can already see, is minus 15. F 21 is in this direction, and the magnitude is exactly the same as F12.
All right, so there is no opposite. Again, the object doesn't, the paint bucket you're pouring paint into does not do anything to you. You gave away your paint. That's all that took place. So just understand, there is no, the action causes a reaction. No, the reaction is your action causes you you made the action. You now have changed yourself by, if I cut my arm off, I've cut my arm off, right? I gave away my arm. I don't have an arm now. Now I'm going to be biased on this side, right? I'm going to lean this way all the time. There's no need for anybody to hit me with another arm.
So you see, 1 is pushing on 2 with 50 newtons in this direction, 2 is pushing back on 1 with 50 newtons, and the whole system is being accelerated with 1 meter per second squared.
So the 5 meters per second. So the leftover is the amount of change you just changed in the big object technically. The little object gave it away. It gave it to something much bigger. The much bigger object doesn't move as fast. Therefore, they move off at that new speed because of the increase in the mass.
In these 2 examples, the one where I had the baseball on my hand, you saw that it was consistent with the third law. In this example, you also see that it's consistent with the third law. The contact force from one on the other.
Right, it's consistent, but it isn't right. That's all I would argue, okay? Yes, it's a consistent way of looking at it. You're going to get away with it. But again, once you go into space, then you can't get away with it anymore. Because you lost the visual of what am I pushing against. Why doesn't the thrust have to push against something if it's going to fight back? There is no thing with inertia you're pushing against, right? So there's no argument that it's somehow is the resistance of the space. I push the object in, it's giving me the opposite reaction. No, the opposite reaction came from the fact that I gave away my bias. I created a bias inside myself by giving you my checkers, whatever, however you want to look at it. I'm just saying it's an important distinction to me. It's kind of like obvious. It surprises me that in all these hundreds of years between Newton and this law and, you know, nuclear physicists, that no one has really said we're looking at this the wrong way. Nothing's fighting. Nothing's fighting back. Nothing's fighting change. Okay? That's the first wrong premise, that things resist change. And the second wrong premise is somehow they fight back when you change them. Those are wrong premises. They're wrong interpretations. It's just literally wrong to say it that way, because that's not really the action, and it's sort of provable in the sense that space, again, the space analogy proves it. Because the same law still works in space, where you just can't blame anything for oppositely reacting, except the internal condition of I poured my paint. I gave away my momentum in a direction. That means my equilibrium has been changed. By giving it away, I changed my equilibrium, and I have a bias in the opposite direction because I gave it away.
It's the same as from the other one, but in opposite signs. Is this a proof? No. Can the third law be proven? No. Do we believe in it?
Again, so I'd say it. Yes, of course it can be proven. I can take a can of paint and I can explain that this is how much paint it has. This is how much bias it has in a direction. I pour the bias into another can. I've obviously changed how much bias it has. And that's the law, essentially. The law is just saying you can only use this stuff. You know, you have to follow where it's going. And then this would get to my other argument against the kinetic energy formula, which is simply you can't do it in the wrong order. You can't convert your energy into heat, for example, and then say I still kept it as a one direction. I scattered the light and somehow it magically turned back into a laser beam. That's not going to happen. How else? But just this idea that you can't use the energy twice in any other sense, that you can keep its direction. As soon as its direction is lost, you've lost the bias. As soon as you scatter the light, you lose its bias in one direction, right? I mean, it doesn't have a bias in a direction anymore, so it can't impact something with it in a direction until you're just getting hit by photons from one direction. But the whole thing can't possibly be changed. If I give away stuff in all directions, you can understand that if I give away the same amount this way and that way, my equilibrium is the same. I don't change my equilibrium. So something can give away energy and not change its equilibrium. So there's no opposite reaction. Even though it gave energy away in every direction, gave away lots of energy, there's no change in its internal condition. So you could argue, what's the equal and opposite reaction for the sun when it's radiating all this energy? Well, it's not because the universe is pushing back. It's because the sun's giving away as much energy in one direction as is the other direction. So it's kept its same equilibrium.
Yes. Why do we believe in it? Because all measurements, all experiments within the uncertainties are consistent with the third law.
So let's just understand, all the experiments are subtly different, and that those differences have to be understood. The tire hitting the road is very different. It's the same principle, right? You're giving away a bias in a direction. The tire's rotation is giving it away this way into the road. It's moving particles of the road in a direction. All right, so clearly it's giving away energy in one direction. So it has to go the other direction because it gave it away. And it's the same as the rocket. But understand, the two are different. The contact process of transferring energy is different when you're not contacting and you're giving away your own matter in a direction. When you give away your own matter in a direction, you've clearly created a bias inside of you where now you have matter still going this way, but you gave away the matter going that way.
Action equals minus reaction. It is something that you experience every day. I remember.
All right, so I don't know, go
I had
ahead.
a garden hose in the lawn, and I would open the faucet, and the garden hose would start to snake backwards. Why? Water squirts out. The garden hose pushes onto the water in this direction. The water pushes back onto the garden hose.
Okay, the water pushes back on the garden hose. That's not what's happening. The garden hose is a system, and the water's part of the system. And it can give the water away in any direction you happen to have the nozzle pointed. And that's the fact. You're going to give away total pressure inside the hose is going in all directions. You're going to give away one direction through a long snaky nozzle. It doesn't matter how snaky the nozzle is. If I have a round sphere with pressure in it and I poke a hole in it here, well, the fact is that, okay, I could extend that nozzle and turn it this way. Now I'm giving away energy that was going this way. So inside, I'm giving away energy that's going that way if I pull the nozzle up and have a right angle. Now I'm giving away this way. I'm not giving away this way anymore. See, the hole is saying, okay, I'm just going straight out that way. But if I change the direction of the nozzle, I'm changing what actually leaves the body. What actually leaves the body is stuff going this way. Even though the nozzle looks like it's going this way, it's really not. It's going that way. So it's really letting pressure go that way. It's really made a hole over here. So where I point the nozzle is essentially saying, where's the hole in the pressure vessel? Which direction is the hole in? I'm changing the direction of where the pressure's leaving. So I'm expelling momentum in a direction, wherever way the nozzle is pointed. And obviously the whole system of pressure has to equally and opposite react, in the sense that it gave away this direction, it has to go in this direction because it has an internal bias. It still has energy going this way. You gave away the equalizing energy this way. Now this energy is strong. It's going to push you in that direction. So that's why the hose moves. There's no opposite reaction from the environment. The environment isn't going to make the hose move. What the hose gave away is going to make the hose move.
And it snakes back. Action equals minus reaction. You take a balloon. You take a balloon and you blow.
So this is like I said, the example is so obvious, and yet he's going to, let's just play it, because he should know that this is more an example of what happens in space. that this is an example that the atmosphere doesn't have anything to do with what the balloon's going to do.
Up the balloon. And let the air out. The balloon.
See, this gives people who get the answer wrong. I would have gotten the answer wrong 20 years ago. That rockets need, I always thought the ground, when the rocket's taking off, hey, the ground is really helping. And it's too bad they lose the ground when they're going up because, man, that engine's got to work a lot better when it's hitting against the ground. No, it doesn't work any better. That doesn't help at all. Because the only way the rocket's working is by this stuff it's giving away. And the fact is the ground's in the way. The ground is making it harder to push its pressure out because it's pushing pressure back in. It's rebounding pressure back against my pressure. I'm trying to release stuff going this way, and the damn ground is pushing air back in, which is compressing my pressure, which is reducing the amount of crap I can get out of the engine. So it's defeating my purpose. It's not helping me. It's hurting me. I'm sorry to say, but that's the real physics. All right. And so this notion that the exhaust is pushing against something and that thing has to push back, that's a wrong notion. And, at this level in physics, they should be very clear that's the wrong notion. That things give away their momentum. They don't sit there and, that's all there is to it. It's just what you gave away. It has nothing to do with what anything else is throwing back at you, because most of the time you're never going to stick around to wait for the opposite reaction. You're never going to feel the reflection because you already left. The process of giving it away already changed your direction. The instant you gave it away, you started moving the opposite way. The reflection isn't going to help you at all because you're already leaving town.
Pushes onto the air must push onto the balloon. And therefore, when you let it go, the balloon will go in this direction.
Right. So again, he's saying basically what he knows. He knows this isn't right, and he just didn't think about it long enough to say, I shouldn't say that, because the air is not pushing back. Me pushing against the air has nothing to do with the balloon moving. The balloon's moving because it's giving away its pressure in one direction, and the opposite pressure still exists in the balloon. The front of that balloon is pushing in this direction. It was at equilibrium. When you have it closed, there's arrows going that way, and there's arrows going that way. And now that you've opened this way, you're letting energy out this way, and the bias in the balloon is still going this way, so the balloon goes that way. It doesn't need the atmosphere to exist. I do it inside a vacuum, the balloon moves just as fast. This has nothing to do with pushing against air. And like I said, he knows that. It's just that they've gotten so used to these analogies, and they're just wrong.
Which is the basic idea behind a rocket.
Right, it's the basic idea. See how he knows it. It's the basic idea behind a rocket, and a rocket works in space. Okay, the big fiery flame coming out of the rocket works in space, and it works in space not because it's pushing against space, not because space is reacting to the push and having an opposite reaction. The space isn't doing a damn thing. You're doing it by giving your stuff away.
I love to play with balloons, don't you?
No, not really. I don't love it. It's not even close to. Just imagine all the things it's not even close to.
If I do it like this and I let it go, the air will come out in this direction, and so then that means the balloon is pushing on the air in this direction. The air must be pushing.
So he shouldn't say that. That's just wrong. A tiny percentage might be right. I won't even say a tiny percentage might be right, because we're right back to the road and the friction thing and all of that, and it really isn't about the road pushing back. It's about the tire giving energy away in one direction, and now it's stuck with energy in the other direction.
On the balloon in this direction. There it goes.
All right, so again, and there it goes, exactly the same without any air. So suck all the air out of 2051 or whatever the room is called, and the balloon goes just as well.
Make it to the moon, but you saw the idea of a rocket. Action equals minus reaction.
Okay, it's just wrong. Action equals you changed who you are by acting. Your action, if your action has anything to do with giving away energy, you're moving. Okay, as a consequence, because you gave away energy in a direction.
If you fire a gun, the gun exerts a force on the bullet. The bullet exerts an equal force on the gun.
See, again, the bullet does not affect anything at all. The bullet affects no force in the opposite. It does no reacting except you put paint in my bucket, I go. Okay? You blow on something, it doesn't blow back at you. The bullet didn't do a damn thing. The explosive did it. The explosive went this way and it went that way. The recoil of the gun isn't because you're getting blowback from the bullet. You're getting blowback from the fact that the explosion went both ways. And the same amount of stuff goes this way into the bullet and the rest of the stuff goes this way into the gun. That's all there is. The equal and opposite reaction is that energy, in most cases, the origins of what we might call energy, right? We know the origin is that can't have an origin because energy is constantly moving through the environment, just changes its condition. So we know the origin of the fact that you can create, you put the energy in a circumstance where now you can, like if I do spin a circle around and around and around, I speed it up, a flywheel. Now that flywheel can give energy in any direction. All I have to do is smash something against it and I can grab energy in one direction, right? Up or this way, or I can take it in any direction. All right, so I can make it directional now. I can take energy going in all directions and I can pull it off in just one direction, and that makes it so much more visible what energy it has. But that's all it is, and light is created by suns exploding. Well, the explosion means that it's by its nature, it's creating energy in both directions. So the nature of many sources of energy that we call sources that are really just circumstances where the energy can now be made directional, you're really just saying it's an explosion. And that's the point where you've now made direction out of it, right? So the gun's a good example because it's taking the explosion, it's pushing the bullet with that way, and it's pushing the gun with that way. It loses this way to heat and a lot of other things, so the gun will lose some of the energy going in the sideways directions, but obviously some of it will reflect. Little particles will bounce off the inside of the gun, and they're still going at a high velocity, higher than the bullet, and therefore they'll push the bullet, the little particles, after reflecting off the surface. So you're taking an explosion and going this way, and you're really, it's like putting mirrors around the sun, and then you just kind of focus the light into two beams. You can take something that's going in all directions and convert it into something just going in one direction. But the price will be is that all of those mirrors will have imbalances on them, tension. So you're going to have to support them with something so you can compensate for the push this way with the push that way with a steel rod between the two, so it equalizes. But anyway, what's the point I really want to get to? Yeah, so the origins of many forms of energy are explosions. So that's why it looks like equal and opposite reaction, is because the explosion itself created action in both directions.
Which is called the recoil. You feel it in your hands, in your shoulder.
Right, and you don't feel it because there's a bullet in the gun. That's not why you feel it. Okay, there has to be, obviously you could argue that the center of gravity of the explosion will move out of the gun. Okay, the explosion, if you don't have any force on the opposite side, if there's no bullet in the gun, then the explosive itself will move this way as it's exploding, and therefore reduce how much energy, how much recoil you have. But that's what's the point to make? It's incidentally different. It's not a huge difference.
I have here a marvelous device, which is a beautiful example of action equals minus reaction. I show you from above what it looks like. You'll see more details later.
All right, this is just overkill. So again, I'll just point out how he's going to say it wrong again.
This rotates about this axis rather freely. The axis is vertical. And we have here a reservoir of water, which we will heat up. Turns into steam, and these are hollow tubes, and the steam will squirt out. And so when the steam squirts out in this direction, the tube exerts a force on the steam in this direction, So the steam exerts an equal force in opposite direction.
Okay, so now he's saying the steam exerts an opposite force. So again, still wrong. The fact is that it's another pressure vessel. And again, all you're doing is changing where you're shooting, what part of the pressure you're releasing, what direction are you releasing. The direction is in the nozzle. The nozzle is just an extension of the round pressure, right? So you have round pressure, and the nozzle is just an extension of the same round pressure. So technically the nozzle can let energy go this way, any direction. Obviously you can't let it go, inside the nozzle. But I'm just saying it's making available any one of those directions. So you're turning it to make it shoot in one direction. And all you're doing is releasing wherever the nozzle is pointed. You're just letting the pressure in the vessel, you're just changing where you poke the hole in the vessel by changing the direction of the nozzle. And you're just releasing energy in a direction, and that direction means that you still have the opposite direction because you were at equilibrium.
And so the thing will start to rotate like this. And I would like to demonstrate that.
So again, you can do this experiment in a vacuum and it still works. So it can't be that it's pushing against something. That's not the opposite reaction.
You can see it now there. There's a little bit of luck there, you see it. So, I'm going to heat it. Walking. When you walk, you push against the floor. The floor pushes back at you.
So again, it doesn't really. All you need to do is do your part, the pushing against. You don't need to hang around for the reaction. Often the reaction, you can sort of like footprints on the sand or something. You step on and the footprint almost disappears again because the sand pushes back, but it's so slow that how could that push back have anything to do with it? You already left the building and it's pushing back.
And if the floor wouldn't push back at you, you couldn't even walk. You couldn't go forward.
Yeah, you could. So, because as long as you're making contact, that's it. All you have to have is the contact where you could pour it into his bucket. As long as you can reach his bucket with your force, as long as you can transfer it, then, you're going in that direction. It would be almost like cooling something, I guess. You could almost argue that if you cool something in one location, something's hot, and you cool it in one location, the object's going to move because it's still got heat going that way, but you're not creating any radiation going the other way.
If you walk on ice, very slippery, you can't go anywhere. Because you can't push on the ice, so the ice won't push back on you.
You can't interact with it, that's all. I mean, you've just turned ice. Ice is just saying, I'm going to make the surface more like air. And I'm not going to have very good contact. I'm not going to be touching enough atoms, so I can't give it my momentum. That's all you've done. You've just interfered the process of transfer. You just put a lid on the paint bucket and said you can't pour paint into it.
That's another example where you see action equals minus reaction.
This
engine is called Hero's engine. Hero, according to the Greek legends, was a priestess of Aphrodite. Let's first look at it.
Now, so all that's deciding is that the pressure is on the inside going in all directions. You happen to be letting out this direction here, so you've changed the bias. Then you let this direction, you've changed the bias. You just keep letting the change in the bias of the direction you're releasing. And obviously the only part of the vessel that can move is this part, so it's going to move.
She was a priestess of Aphrodite. And her lover, Leander, would swim across the Hellespont every night to be with her. And then one night, who died drowned. And Hero threw herself into the sea. Very romantic thing to do, but of course also not very smart thing to do. On the other hand, it must have been a smart lady if she invented really this engine.
Well, that's kind of a silly story, right? Because we know that didn't happen.
Yesterday, I looked at the web. Ask.com.
Okay, so you can date this, this is the 2009 or something when there still was other search engines available. Anyway, you went stuck with the monopoly of Google. But Ask.com was never a search engine, actually. It was just another one of these fake things like DuckDuckGo, where they're just using somebody else's results. But anyway, that's a whole nother subject about all the fake and phony crap in our culture. Which I guess would be sort of a reflection that physics is full of fake and phony crap, and underdone, underfinished, imprecise, incorrect, and it's gotten just as sloppy as culture. And unfortunately, maybe it led the way. Frankly, culture was still had some integrity 90 years ago, and it's lost all of that, and science is the one that lost all of its integrity, in a sense, in the Einstein era, where the amount of evidence you needed to call something a proof just went lower and lower and lower and lower. But you could argue the kinetic energy theorem, going all the way back to the 1700s, really poor argumentation, really bad science, and so it's just an example that human beings really have to protect about this, protect against this whole bandwagonism thing, jumping on really dumb bandwagons. All right, so that's probably enough of a video, and so the whole point is he just makes a simple version of the other thing by just making holes in a soda can and then picking the soda can out of water, and then the water goes out of the holes and the can spins. And again, it's spinning for the same reason, because the water's under pressure in the can. You're releasing the pressure in a direction, so the water has a directionality. You're giving away a direction, and by giving away a direction, it means you still have your equilibrium direction, and the opposite pressure is still there, and the opposite pressure is going to push on the can. And you're changing where you're giving it away every second, and so therefore you just keep adding velocity to the can. All right. So, enough of a video. So, this has been a DraftScience video presentation. Thank you for your attention, but, I don't even know who the hell you are, frankly. And obviously I'm not getting to an audience that can make a counter argument, and so I'm just stuck in a quandary of understanding why you are so resistant to recognizing, that this is not very good physics. I mean, it's just kind of overtly wrong for Professor Lewin to talk about equal and opposite reactions when he knows spaceships don't need them. An equal and opposite reaction is not going to move a spaceship.